The first US military formation of 4,500 men from the 34th Division arrived in Northern Ireland in mid-January 1942. Under a program codenamed Bolero, within 2.5 years, more than 1.5 million US military personnel had arrived in the UK, around 700,000 between January and June 1944, who were scattered in camps and air bases across the country. The British Army over the same period doubled from its 1940 strength of 1.5 million men. In addition, more than 250,000 Canadian and thousands of French, Polish, Dutch, Belgian and Czech personnel were deployed in national contingents. When the D-Day landings were postponed from the 5th to the 6th of June, the British temporarily halted their troop flow, but the Americans continued to move units from concentration areas to marshalling camps and embarkation points. This led to the first signs of congestion at Southampton, the principal port of embarkation. US activities were almost nil on D-Day, since the British were using the areas to embark their forces, but beginning the 7th of June the port was crowded with marching columns of US troops together with convoys of vehicles and tanks. Months of toil went into build-up priority lists which specified the order in which units were to embark across the Channel. Nevertheless, planners had foreseen the need for an effective movement control organisation. For this purpose, the Build-Up Control Organisation, Buco, was set up for British and other Allied forces at Southwestern Hotel, codenamed HMS Shrapnel, and American Buco at a wing of the Civic Centre to make best possible use of shipping without clogging the camps, roads and embarkation points, and more important, would see the modification of priorities in accordance with tactical requirements. Buco was not an agency of the Supreme Commander, but operated directly under the tactical commands most immediately concerned with the build-up of troops, and shortly after D-Day, an organisation called Little Buco was set up on the far shore that functioned as Buco's advanced echelon. The procedures developed by Buco were designed to provide movement control machinery that could be adapted to the needs of the tactical commanders and the transportation available. At daily meetings, Buco made alterations in priorities desired by the tactical commanders and modified the planned allocation of shipping and craft to meet current requirements. At the outset, the port experienced a serious shortage of personnel, and there were not enough vessels and craft to lift all the forces moving into the port area, especially between the 9th and 12th of June. Loading tables proved erroneous, so that all planning and loading had to be effected after the units had arrived, when the actual number of troops and vehicles could be determined. On the 9th of June, Buco ordered the loading of units on vessels as rapidly as possible, regardless of priority, and directed the temporary curtailment of movements into the marshalling camps behind Southampton. Before the end of June, headquarters took steps to end its embarrassment in shipping. General Eisenhower appealed to Washington and succeeded in getting additional allocations of both motor transport ships and landing ship tanks. In addition, the theatre secured a postponement of the planned reduction in the coaster fleet, which was to have occurred after D+42. The transportation of personnel and vehicles reached a peak in July 1944 and continued through September. During this period, there was some simplification of organisation and procedures in the southern base section. Beginning in July, troops scheduled for loading on deep-sea troop transports moved directly to the waterfront. In the following month, Marshalling Area C, which funnelled units into Southampton, was turned over to the 14th Port based at the Civic Centre. With this transfer, the area became the staging area of the 14th Port, which was given responsibility for the movement of troops from there to loading points. By the end of September 1944, a total of 1,460,426 personnel was transported from the United Kingdom to the continent. The heaviest embarkations of men and vehicles were over the piers and hards at Southampton in the period the 6th of June to the 6th of September. Southampton also handled patients and prisoners of war evacuated from the continent. In addition, the port played an important role in the outloading of cargo rolling stock and gasoline. Throughout the port, facilities were shared by the British and Americans on a day-to-day allocation made in accordance with the tactical needs of the men on the ground in Normandy. In his report on Operation Neptune to the Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Ramsay states it was found necessary during planning to set up new organisations to control various aspects of the operation during the vital first few weeks, in which the tempo of the initial assaults had to be maintained at the highest pitch. From the afternoon of D+1 until D+8, better weather enabled the rate of build-up to be progressed, despite some shortage of ferry craft due to casualties from the first 2 days. Convoys sailed from the UK and arrived in France on time. This resulted in a slower turnaround than had been planned, and for a period there was some shortage of ships to be reloaded in the UK. There were also difficulties in the United Kingdom, particularly in the Isle of Wight area and in the port of Southampton. There were also some naval delays in getting ships up to Southampton to reload. The figures of the rate of build-up show the great quantity of shipping that was sailed to France each day. When these are examined, any serious adverse criticism of the naval organisation, either in the United Kingdom or in France, would seem unwarranted. During the first few weeks of the operation, frequent representations were made by your staff and those of your army group commanders whenever the build-up appeared to fall any distance short of the plan. This was natural, and their desire for the maximum rate of reinforcement and of landing stores was fully shared by me. Sometimes I felt, however, that their protests were not entirely related to facts, as, so far as I know, the position of the expeditionary force was never in doubt from D+2 onwards. The naval view had always been that the build-up plan should be an optimum plan at which we should aim, but that its attainment was most improbable, if only by reason of the naval difficulties inherent in the continuous turnaround of such a large volume of shipping. In the event, not only naval difficulties were experienced during the first few weeks, but also a considerable number of military ones, especially with regard to loading in the port of Southampton, and the programme did fall behind as we had expected that it would. It was very satisfactory, therefore, to me that your Chief Administrative Officer was able to report at his meeting held on the 1st of July that the commanders in the field had complete freedom of action so far as the administrative arrangements were concerned. This, it was considered, confirmed our view that the Navy had in fact met the Army's requirements for their reinforcement and maintenance.
1939 to 1945. This tablet was presented to the Southern Railway by the 14th Major Port United States Army in proud and glorious memory of the men and women of the forces of the United Nations who sailed from this port during the war against aggression to secure the freedom of mankind. Now Southampton is returning to normal activity. She might take a well-earned rest, but that would not be in the dock's tradition. Ships, once familiar at her quays, are now carrying passengers and merchandise again. Southampton is still Britain's premier passenger port, prepared to receive any ship and every ship. This is the wartime saga of Southampton Docks, gateway to victory, owned and managed by the Southern Railway.